Jeff, we are live. I'm super excited. We will be talking. Well, you will be talking, and I will be listening like the chump I am. But while we're waiting for everyone to come in, I was asking you beforehand, hey, what did you do before you started becoming the Eurodollar Jesus, as Hugh Henry would call you, or the macro expert by others? So I could just give us a little brief backstory because I haven't heard you talk about this too many places.
Yeah, I started in a grocery store, and that was where I learned basic economics, essentially.
Was it
My
really?
first job, actually, as an intern in college, I went to a little college in Buffalo, New York called Canisius College. That's the degree that's right here. I have no fancy degree, just a 4-year bachelor's degree in finance, not economics. But I interned at an investment advisory firm, just a retail investment advisory firm. And I actually started working there full time after I graduated with the aim of becoming a portfolio manager. Like I think a lot of people who grew up my age, I mean, we all watched Wall Street. We all wanted to be Gordon Gekko, even though he was the anti-hero. That was the idea. And this was the 1990s, so .com era. It made perfect sense. But as working as a portfolio manager, trying to work my way toward becoming a portfolio manager, a lot of that led to doing equity research, which meant, running through financial statements, balance sheets in particular. And as you're looking through different stock opportunities and companies and everything else, I started running into some of the banks and thought, what the hell is all of this stuff on their balance sheet? And why are these balance sheets, even back then, why are they so complicated? They really shouldn't be. What the hell is a repo? Why are there so many of these Eurodollars around? And so looking into those things, I naturally asked some questions and didn't get any answers. And it became quite clear pretty quickly that nobody wanted to give any answers. They didn't have any answers, and they could not possibly care less. So I went outside the people that I knew. I joined some trade groups and things like that. And every once in a while, there would be the big economist from the Wall Street firm in New York City would drop in Buffalo and make his appearance. And everybody would kiss his butt and everything else, because he was the big shot from Wall Street. And I'd go up and ask him usually at the end of the line, say, hey, what's all these repos and Eurodollars and things like that? Why are there so many derivatives? And you could tell he had no clue about any of it. And the answer I kept getting back in all of these places was basically, don't worry about the Fed's got it covered. Don't worry about it. Alan Greenspan's got it covered. And that was just so unsatisfying that, it just, you start tugging at some of these threads and nobody else wants to give you an answer. And so you have this ambition to find out for yourself. And then, of course, as the .com bust became a bust, the .com bubble became a bust, you start to see more symptoms about, securitizations and some of the offshore stuff that was going on in the late 90s and middle 2000s. It became pretty clear pretty quickly that this was really important stuff. And if nobody else was going to do it, I'm going to have to do it for myself. And then, of course, by the time we got to 2008, it was like, okay. This is really important stuff. And obviously the officials, government, nobody seems to know what the hell they're doing. And it just kind of punctuated that whole journey from the little intern over here in Buffalo to, hey, I need to learn about the monetary system. And at least so I can have an idea for myself.
Yeah. So let's I think people are here now, Jeff, so let's kick it off. The future of the dollar, or that there is. So
is it really the dollar though? That's the question, Josh, and you know the answer to that. So
I don't think I do. And I'm going to be excited to listen in. So I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah, forgive my screen here for a second. All right. Why is the dollar still king? And really, I want to talk first about a conference I went to just last month. And I think I've mentioned it before once or twice on YouTube and other places. And it's about the term dollar dominance. I kept seeing this idea, or kept hearing dollar dominance. And the conference I went to was sort of, a left-leaning academic conference, which, by the way, just, tell you something about myself. I don't care. Left-leaning, right-leaning. In fact, I did to this left-leaning conference last month. Just last week, I was at what maybe people would call a right-leaning conference. I did a presentation for Hillsdale College. I don't really care about partisan politics because I think in the context of the Eurodollar and the monetary discussion, economics, they're so unhelpful because everybody breaks down into tribes right away. But either way, I went to this conference in the UK last month, And you kept hearing this term dollar dominance. And it wasn't, the way it was being used, it was clear that it was a derisive comment. It was a lament. People were saying, the dollar dominance is not a good thing. There's outside the United States, I think there's more of an awareness of dollar dominance and in thinking about it as something that's not necessarily what the world would want and what would rather represent. And that's really a new type, a new phenomenon. That's not something that's, for most of my history doing this research, people didn't really care about the dollar system. So you kind of hear that all over the place. And this year in particular, boy, you really do hear the idea of dethroning the dollar. It's been in the background for quite so many years, but this year, the BRICS conference, remember we had that just a couple months ago. They were going to issue and restart the gold standard. They were going to work toward a common BRICS currency. Of course, a lot of that was just Russian disinformation. But essentially, there is an undercurrent of de-dollarization, is another term that comes up quite a bit. And the question is, first of all, who's talking about de-dollarization? Who is it that's actually attempting to de-dollarize? But more than that, is that actually a possibility? So we have to start by asking the question, why is everyone seemingly gunning for the US dollar? And as I said, it's not about, we can't pin this one on Joe Biden. We can't pin this one on the current administration. This has been a bipartisan failure for a very, very long period of time, for back before I was born. So this isn't a partisan issue as much as it's made out to be a partisan issue a lot of times. It's always couched in the terms of politics, especially U.S. sanctions. Are U.S. sanctions driving foreigners toward de-dollarization? Is that why they lament the dollar dominance? And that's part of it. But that's only the more recent developments, because there's a lot going on behind the scenes that have led us to this point along the way. So the question really isn't necessarily why are they gunning for the U.S. dollar, because people have hated the U.S. dollar for a very long period of time. The question is, why now? So asking, can the dollar be overthrown? What we're really asking is, what exactly are those claiming that the dollar needs to be overthrown? What is it they're really trying to replace? Because the issue is not just sticking different pieces of paper in the government printing press and coming out with different funny little pieces of paper. It's a little bit more involved in that. But I think many people have the perception that it's really that easy. We just flip from one currency to another. As soon as a government decides we're going to build our own reserve currency, we're going to just turn on the printing press and we'll have a brand new reserve regime. But that's really not what we're talking about here, because the current reserve currency regime is not U.S. dollars as most people would understand them, or as most people accept them, and as most people think of when they think of the U.S. dollar. And the U.S. dollar itself has gone through many different incarnations over the many, many years. But what most people may not be aware of, it's not physical currency at all. So the issue here isn't actually dollar dominance. Whether we know it or not, it's really Eurodollar dominance. And Eurodollar dominance, as most people who have paid attention to the Eurodollar University channel, or even just looked into the reserve currency system themselves, the Eurodollar does dollars very differently. And it's not a trivial distinction. As Milton Friedman said way back in 1969, this is not like physical currency. This is not like deposit obligations where we put physical currency into a vault and we do a fractional multiplier magic and come up with paper liabilities. It's even more than that. We don't even have the reserves to fraction. In the Eurodollar system, everything is essentially reserveless. As he said in 1969, the amount of literal cash that Eurodollar banks hold is negligible. And this is something, by the way, I go over in every classroom video we do in the members section, to constantly remind ourselves this is a virtual ledger currency system. And that makes a huge difference, because we're depending upon different entities rather than the US government and its printing press for this currency. Because it's not physical currency, because it's a virtual ledger currency, that means we place emphasis for the operation as well as maintenance of this system on something else other than the US government, which we'll get to in just a moment. As some people might know, the Eurodollar system itself, this Eurodollar dominance, started out with nobody really knowing where it came from or where it started. There are a bunch of different origin stories that ironically have to do with Russians who were afraid, back then the Soviet Union, who was afraid of sanctions and confiscation. So they said, you know what? Because we have under the Bretton Woods system, we have largely a de facto dollar standard. They didn't want their dollar balances held by U.S. banks to potentially be confiscated by the U.S. government. So they started moving them to foreign correspondents, especially in London and throughout Europe, Montreal and Canada, Japan, and different places around the world. And so this Eurodollar system really developed in silence underneath the Bretton Woods system. And the reason it did were for a variety of reasons, but because it was a reserveless virtual currency system, it could grow and expand and do all sorts of things while nobody was really seeing it. Nobody was really paying attention to it. And so, by the time we get to the 60s and 1970s, it became, you couldn't get away from the Eurodollar system. There was a level of awareness in the 1970s, certainly, that it seems odd today because we always think that we progress in our knowledge. But in the case of global reserve currency dynamics, we have regressed since the Volcker era, primarily because of Volcker and Alan Greenspan. But essentially, there was, for a time, a deep fascination with this Eurodollar system because it was clear it was that important to the global reserve currency. In establishing Eurodollar dominance, not dollar dominance, but Eurodollar dominance, this reserveless ledger money system, in establishing that dominance, it was clear that there was so much happening behind the scenes that nobody had any idea what it was really talking about. Klaus Friedrich was I believe a professor at Pennsylvania University or Princeton University, one of those. And he wrote a bunch of stuff in the late 60s and early 70s. And he said, look, this Eurodollar system is doing really big things out there in the global reserve currency arena offshore, and nobody knows anything about it. There's no data, there's no literature, there's no real scholarship, and yet it's actually happening. So again, this is one reason why people don't realize it's Eurodollar dominance, is because the Eurodollar itself has largely been hidden from public view from the very, very beginning. But what's important about the Eurodollar system, whether or not it's hidden, whether it's hidden or in the public eye, is what he said in the second paragraph there. What the Eurodollar actually did really well, what made it so dominant, was the fact that banks or cash owners or cash savers in one part of the world who had absolutely no connection to somebody on the opposite side of the world could access this Eurodollar system, the system of interlocking bank networks and ledgers, really. They could access that system so that money and capital, not in the physical form, but through all of these ledger entries, could move around the world in the blink of an eye as efficiently and as necessary, as much as possible in order to undertake the roles of a reserve currency. That was what made the Eurodollar so dominant. Because it didn't have the limitations of a physical currency system, it could operate so incredibly efficiently. Again, speed of telecommunications, which is one of the reasons why the Eurodollar system took off at the same time telecommunications revolution really came into its own. We could suddenly move money from various, what were beforehand, very different systems from different parts of the world, and we could move it, in, again, like I said, in the blink of an eye very efficiently. As Robert Russa called it in 1984, and this was ironic because this was at a conference sponsored by the Federal Reserve Branch in Boston, and it was held at Bretton Woods in New Hampshire on the 40th anniversary of the Bretton Woods adoption. And here's Robert Russa, who was a former vice president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, as well as the Undersecretary of Treasury for Monetary Affairs. And he described it, I think, the most accurate I've ever seen. In a very succinct terms, he called it new networks of interbank relations. I don't know if he meant that literally or not. I like to think that he did, because that was the literal truth of what the Eurodollar system actually was. These new networks of interbank relations that allowed for real magic where it came to reserve currency. I like to tell this story that it showed up in the magazine called World of Banking in 1984. And it sounds a little bit quaint to our modern ears, where we're used to the internet and everything's on your phone and ease of using apps. But think about 1984, if you're old like me. Think about 1984, what happened here. We had a guy from Arkansas, I believe it was Pine Bluff, Arkansas, who was in Sydney, Australia. And he whipped out his Visa card, which was a credit card and relatively a new thing back then. And he stuck it in an ATM machine, which was also a relatively new thing back then. And he got out Australian dollars from his Visa card. So a guy from Arkansas travels all the way to Australia, and he's able to do everything that he would do at home. And how is that actually done? Well, according to the story, we have the ATM, which sends an electronic signal to Singapore, then via geostationary satellite under the Pacific or over the Pacific. I think there was a cable under the Pacific, gets to California. From California, the signal has to go to Visa's headquarters in Washington, D.C. Then from Washington, D.C., the signal goes to this bank in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. But that's only half of the story. It's actually only a quarter of the story, but it's only half of the story that the World of Banking told. The other half was the signal had to go all the way back to Australia. And the round trip, 31,000-mile trip, took 6 seconds, which, again, that sounds doesn't sound very good to somebody in the 21st century. But back in 1984, that was like magic. We had somebody in Arkansas who could access a payment network using a credit card and get paid in Australian dollars way to hell on the other side of the planet. And that was only the part that we could see. There's more to it than that. In fact, the more interesting part is what came after it. Because the bank in Australia is dispensing Australian dollars, not because it's a charity. The bank in Australia expects to get recompensated or reimbursed from whom? Well, it's not likely the bank in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. So the bank in Australia actually has to send an electronic message, probably through the SWIFT system, likely to some sponsoring member at the Chips Exchange in New York City. And then the Chips Exchange sponsoring member would then have to request payment on behalf of another correspondent bank that likely did business with this bank in Arkansas. Also, that the liability that was created in dispensing currency for this Arkansas guy in Sydney could be compensated in some way through this massive network of payment systems from Arkansas to another correspondent bank through chips, using SWIFT messaging codes all the way back to another correspondent, likely in Singapore or someplace in Asia, doing business in Eurodollars, so that the bank in Australia can be relatively reassured that it's going to be compensated for these physical pieces of paper that were dispensed on everybody's behalf down in Australia. And that's not the entire story either. Taking it further, when you use a credit card, whether it's in an ATM machine or any other way, we don't think about where do those dollars come from. Remember, these are not physical dollars, but where does those dollar liabilities actually come from? It's not actually as if we're shipping pieces of paper. It's not actually as if the bank in Arkansas itself is likely running that receivable. Instead, and this was an innovation from a couple years later. If you've ever used a credit card, and I would imagine that everybody who's actually listening to my voice right now has probably used a credit card at some point in their lifetime, what you don't realize is where do those dollars come to fill that payment liability? Where does the trace in payments actually go back to? And if it was 1986 and after, if our story took place then, it's not actually, again, not the bank in Arkansas. It's likely a special purpose vehicle, an asset-backed trust, like a master trust, where the receivable was created and sold to the master trust. And the real magic of the Eurodollar system really begins at that point. So we have all of this payment architecture up there that some people are kind of aware of. But behind the scenes, in the plumbing, in the shadows, we have all of this other stuff managing what looks like currency to some people, but is actually ledgers on top of ledgers on top of ledgers on top of ledgers. And we don't need to go through it here like we do with the Eurodollar University membership videos, but essentially in ABS, when you use your credit card, what actually happens? Well, There's usually a special purpose vehicle, a master trust set up somewhere. The bank will sell that receivable on the spot to the master trust who is set up to take it. The bank actually gets booked the profit for selling the receivable. But where does the money actually come from? The non-physical ledger money actually come from? Well, it comes from a couple different sources. Money market funds who claim to have cash will buy commercial paper issued by this master trust. The master trust will also tranche its receivables into securitized structures, and they'll sell those tranche bonds to other banks and other pension funds and other investors around the rest of the system. The money market fund itself might actually access the repo market, which is a big, important source of funding for these master trusts. So basically, we have wholesale money throughout the Eurodollar system that gets transacted through all of this architecture, also that one guy from Arkansas can go all the way down to Sydney, Australia, and be completely assured that he can access a usable form of payment. There's this massive, complex system of ledgers and payment networks and funding networks and financial utilities that span the entire planet. That is the Eurodollar system. As Robert Russa said, new networks of interbank relations. But having described these new networks of interbank relations, what's the point here? It's not just about some guy going to Australia, some guy from Arkansas going to Australia. And it's breathtaking and stunning in its complexity, which is why I always say the Eurodollar more closely resembles a telecommunications network than it does what most people might imagine of a currency or reserve currency system. And all anybody really has to do is essentially plug into it. And you've got to agree to some standards for the system itself. But notice here, because we're not using physical government currency, it's all about the banks that operate the ledgers, and they operate the financial utilities, and they operate the payment networks like SWIFT, which is nothing more than a coding message. The banking system is the Eurodollar system. Again, Robert Russa, new networks of interbank relationships. And what that means is we have the ability to transact in as many places around the world as possible and do so in reasonably assured fashion, again, at the speed, almost the speed of light. That's what a reserve currency is actually supposed to do. It's not about pricing anything in oil. A global reserve currency is about the medium. It's about intermediating through any number of ways to allow various parts around the planet to be able not to just talk to each other, but transact with one another. A global reserve currency is something that has to be made widely available and also be widely acceptable. And so you can see why the Eurodollar excelled at these two requirements. Because of these were new networks of interbank relations, essentially a telecommunications network, whose capabilities of keeping track of who owes what all over the planet, all of this sophisticated architecture, it made common medium, the global reserve currency, the Eurodollars that don't exist, this ledger currency, they made Eurodollars widely available all over the planet. And it was dependable. And because it piggybacked on the US dollar denomination, even though there are no US dollars in it, it was also widely acceptable. To put it in a very simple term, the Eurodollar was friggin' usable. It was really usable. That was Eurodollar dominance. Because when we sit back and look at what a reserve currency does, what it's supposed to do, again, it's not about pricing oil in that common currency or any currency. It's not about national currencies at all. It's entirely about the medium, intermediating through very different systems. So in this very simple example that I like to use, a reserve currency is essential because think about it from the perspective of either Japanese import firm or the Swedish export firm. And it doesn't have to be merchandise goods either. This can also be direct investment and financial flows. But in this simple example, we have Sweden who is selling goods to Japan. And a Swedish firm and a Japanese firm, they're not going to be able to transact in their local currencies because a Swedish firm would get paid in Japanese yen. And in Sweden, they would have absolutely no use for yen. Likewise, the Japanese firm is not likely to have access to Swedish kroner someplace around Tokyo. Those currencies are not usable in both of those places. So Japan and Sweden, while these two firms could transact with one another, I mean, they also have to bridge the gap of communications too. The Eurodollar provided an elegant solution in between them. By making a common medium useful and available in both places, the Japanese firm could pay in US dollars because it could access US dollars. So it could swap between yen and dollars and then send those dollars through this vast telecommunication architecture to the firm in Sweden. And Sweden would receive those US dollars and would be able to use them, either to then swap easily into local kroner or to use them in some other capacity on the global marketplace. The Eurodollar was a common and is a common medium that allows very different systems to transact and do so, as I said, in wide coverage of the entire global system. So that obviously raises a couple questions. A big one is, well, then why does everybody suddenly hate the dollar? Where does this dollar dethrone, a de-dollarization, and this derisive mention of dollar dominance come from? As I mentioned in our previous webinar on the sort of the silent depression and everything that's gone wrong in the economy and the marketplace, in the Eurodollar system, it all goes back to 2008. Very simply, before 2008, from the 1950s as the Eurodollar really arose, especially the 60s, 70s, 80s, the 80s and 90s, the so-called Great Moderation, nobody complained about the dollar because why would they? It was a period of unparalleled prosperity. Plenty of places around the world did not like the United States. They did not like the politics of the Reagan administration or the Bush administration or the Clinton administration. It didn't matter. As long as everybody was benefiting and could benefit in obvious fashion. I mean, the Chinese, for example, as long as everybody was benefiting from this Eurodollar system that was creating unparalleled prosperity, you hold your tongue and you don't complain. Why would you? Everybody was doing very well. Everybody was creating wealth and expanding their economies. We had massive parts of massive swaths of the entire world being transformed from subsistence backwards third world status to suddenly international powerhouses with a genuine middle class lifestyle available for huge chunks of their population. So even if they didn't like the dollar, or didn't like the United States, or didn't like our politics, they certainly were okay accepting the Eurodollar system's method of global reserve currency because it seemed to work for everyone. It really did work for everyone. But since 2008, that's a very different proposition. So we see, as I mentioned in the last webinar, I point to this chart all the time because I don't think people really appreciate what it shows. The U.S. economy since 2008, that's fallen way off. So the U.S. is not gaining the same benefits, the same growth paradigm as it was before, but it's not just the U.S. And it goes beyond strictly, criticisms and distaste for the U.S. dollars. It goes much deeper than that. And it amplifies some of the political divides and social divides and everything else that have existed all along. But again, during the period of unparalleled prosperity, nobody wanted to rock the boat because why would you? And again, this is not just a U.S. phenomenon. Here's European GDP. The European economy has actually performed significantly worse than the U.S. economy, and largely because of the same thing. Again, it always comes back to 2008. The Brazilian economy, if we're going to talk about the BRICS, Brazil, very clearly why Brazil would be looking for a different currency alternative, because they're not getting the benefits from globalized and unparalleled prosperity that they were before 2008. Russia, why is Russia being Russia? Well, a lot of it has to do with the fact that, again, everything has changed since 2008, not accruing the same degree of benefits that they had before that. And of course, the Chinese were massively growing, massively transforming, and they embraced this Eurodollar method of global reserve currency with both arms, both communist arms. They never really changed and became a neoliberal West. They simply said, we started out with Mao, who very nearly destroyed the country, and we're looking at the Soviet Union collapse. We need to embrace some transformation, some economic transformation, if we ever have a prayer of achieving the socialist paradise. And so they embraced this Eurodollar system with both arms and rode it as far as they possibly could. And that terminal point was, again, 2008. In 2008, the breakdown in the Eurodollar system was not what everybody was told. Everybody thinks it was about subprime mortgages. It wasn't about subprime mortgages. As Ben Bernanke much later admitted, I don't think many people know this, to Congress in February 2010, he said, you know what? It was these liquidity pressures outside the United States, intense strains in the global dollar funding markets, intense strains, and as Robert Russo said many years ago, intense strains in these new networks of interbank relations. That's what the 2008 crisis was. And when we go through all of the numbers as we did in the last webinar, I'll go through them briefly. What you see is that the Eurodollar breakdown in 2008 was not a one-off. It had nothing to do with subprime mortgages. That was just a spark that lit the fuse. It was a sea change in the operation of that system, not the system itself, not the networks, not the infrastructure, but the amount of currency and the ability of the Eurodollar system to fluidly respond to the needs of the growing economy. And so almost from the moment the Eurodollar breakdown in 2007, 2008, and 2009, suddenly we've been hearing, hey, I don't like the dollar anymore. And among the first to say so was in March of 2009, a fellow by the name of Zhao, who happened to be the governor of the People's Bank of China. And when he made this statement, I believe it was to a conference of the IMF or BIS, it caused an enormous stir because here was China attacking the United States politically. And what he was saying is, hey, in China, we realize this Eurodollar breakdown, this global dollar shortage, maybe we should start talking about whether or not this dollar system, this Eurodollar system, is actually operating the way we want it to. Because obviously, the entire world just experienced a massive setback from it. And ever since that time in March 2009, there have been dribs and drabs and accelerating public discourse, accelerating comments from people around the world, whether internally, locally, domestically, the idea the dollar is doomed, that entire crowd, or from various parties, various governments and politics and politicians around the world who have not been shy about saying they don't like the dollar, because ever since 2008, they have not benefited from the Eurodollar dominance in the way that they did beforehand. And again, this is some of the data that I presented. I'll just kind of flip through it. I apologize for going quickly because we could spend an enormous amount of time. In fact, I've created an entire YouTube channel to go through this stuff. But essentially, again, it just reinforces the notion the Eurodollar system broke down in 2008, and it has not been the same since. And from that sense, and knowing what we do know about the global economy falling off and slowing down, it's even called globalization. From that, you can start to understand why people might be looking for an alternative. It's not politics, it is economics, small e economics. So the Eurodollar breaks down, and we could keep going forever with this stuff. But essentially, the question about Eurodollar dominance was never about U.S. politics. It was never about U.S. military might. It wasn't even really about the dollar at all. It was because, as I said before, the Eurodollar system made this common medium so friggin' usable, widely available, wide coverage, and widely acceptable. And it was dependable. And another, we should have, a lot more time to talk about this too. Another unappreciated element is that we also have not just the dollar domination, we also have the U.S. court system, methods of arbitration, respect for private property and contracts. That's a huge unappreciated element of Eurodollar dominance too, because Eurodollar operated on those principles, which made it so friggin' usable. So while the Eurodollar system was creating this period of unparalleled prosperity, and it didn't create the period, but it made it possible, this age of innovation. It financed all this stuff. It created the avenues for which so many places around the world could take advantage of. And while it was doing that, you didn't hear the complaints about the dollar, because why would anybody rock the boat? It wasn't about the U.S. Navy or anything like that. It was about the usefulness of it. But now the dollar is impaired, and the fact that the dollar system has been impaired ever since 2008, Now we hear the complaints. Now we hear the political complaints. Well, now we hear somewhat the economic complaints, which are understandable because all of these places around the world, whether they realize it or not, they have suffered the consequences of Eurodollar dominance because it doesn't work the way it used to before. So the task before anyone is not that they're going to replace the dollar, and it's not really that they have to replace the Eurodollar, not the domination. They would have to replace the capabilities of the Eurodollar. Think about that guy from Arkansas down in Australia. It would be like something malfunctioning in the internet and having to scrap the internet and create a brand new internet all from scratch. That's the challenge that countries around the world are facing. It's not like you can just flip a switch or put different pieces of paper in a printing press. Governments can't do this by dictate. These new networks that are no longer so new, these networks of interbank relations, which make the reserve currency possible, you can't just replace them on a whim. And as most people around the world that have looked at this are finding out, you can't really replace it at all. Not that there aren't challenges to the dollar system, not that there aren't methods being used to lower or reduce countries' footprints, not that digital currencies aren't trying to replicate some of these capabilities, but very small scale. But in the current arrangement, the current world that we live in, there is nothing, and I mean nothing, even remotely close to being able to duplicate the Eurodollar's reach and its capacities and its capabilities. That's what needs to happen. The second something challenges those Eurodollar capabilities, that's when you have to worry about the dollar being dethroned and de-dollarizing. And again, I think most governments around the world, including the Indians in particular, as well as the Chinese to a certain extent, they realize the challenge and they're not really attempting to replace and dethrone the dollar at all. But that being said, we shouldn't be comfortable sitting here thinking that the dollar denomination remains the reserve currency by default. That's not a comfortable situation, nor is it a comforting thought. The Eurodollar system does need to be replaced. And that's a whole other conversation that we probably should do another webinar just on that topic alone. But essentially, there are reasons why the Eurodollar system is malfunctioning. There's reasons why, again, people there's so much discontent and dissatisfaction with it. And it remains because there are no challengers. That's not a good operation of a reserve currency system. That's not a desirable outcome. So the dollar system that's hanging on by default and is likely to hang on by default for a very long period of time, we would do well to start thinking about replacing it. Fortunately, there really isn't a whole lot of appetite to do so. There isn't even really much awareness about what the problem is, whether the public or in private, or whether in the public realm, politicians and whatnot. So the answer to the question about dominance, it's really Eurodollar dominance, not dollar dominance. And dethroning the dollar means replacing the Eurodollar system and everything that it actually does. And sadly, even this presentation here doesn't come close to doing it all justice. There's really sophisticated logistics, infrastructure, all of that we don't really appreciate to undertake the operations and roles of a reserve currency system. That's really what it's all about. And again, we could spend a lot more time, and I think there's going to be lots of questions about all of these things. So I'm going to be happy to answer your questions. But first, I hope you guys don't mind. I'm going to give you a little bit of a sales pitch here about Eurodollar University and some of the subscriptions. I want to tell you about, we do have a special one-time offer for the webinar that I'd like you to think about as we get into the question and answer session here. This presentation, a lot of it comes from the various parts of Eurodollar University, whether it be the membership section or the deep dive analysis. Everything that informs my analysis comes from the Eurodollar University perspective, or the Eurodollar perspective that I like to share with Eurodollar University. We have 3 different subscriptions or products available. The first is the Eurodollar University memberships. On the memberships, you saw that in the presentation here, the part where it's going on Master Trust and ABS, that comes from a classroom video. Memberships have all sorts of stuff. There's lots of background material, discussion about how this Eurodollar system works. These new networks of interbank relations, that's what we talk about in the Eurodollar University membership section. how does the Eurodollar work? What is it supposed to do? Money theory, background, all that stuff. And there's all sorts of content in there. There's videos on the basics series, the basics construction, the diagram that I did on the networks and how it looks like a telecommunication network. That comes from the basics series. We have classroom videos. There's 24 of them right now where we go into the details behind this. I do question and answer videos. I have a weekly recap, and there's even a resource library in there with links to all of the primary, well, not yet all, as many links to primary source material as we've been able to combine. And thanks for Jorge for doing that. And the annual membership cost for a Eurodollar University membership is $200. I also do a daily briefing subscription. As the not really creative title suggests, the daily briefing is a briefing every day. So it comes every day in PDF format. It's available on the Eurodollar University website. I discussed the 3 most important macroeconomic developments, usually some macroeconomic data that comes out. I also give you a sense of what I think is the important market mover that day. Usually has something to do with curves, but not always. Whatever really going on in the Eurodollar world, usually a lot about collateral. That's in one PDF form. It comes every day. It's available every day at the Eurodollar University website. The annual list price for that is $340. Then we have the deep dive analysis, which is kind of this presentation, this webinar gives you a flavor of what the deep dive analysis is about, drawing from all of our Eurodollar sources every single day or every business day. I do take some holidays off, but every business day, there's going to be an article about some topic that I think is incredibly important about what tying together some of this background material, describing what's going on in the world economy and the monetary system, the political system occasionally too, how these are all related from the Eurodollar perspective. It's usually a 12 to 1500 word article, got all the charts and everything going on with it. It's how do we make sense of developments in the world using our Eurodollar University tools and background to do so? And the deep dive analysis, there's an annual list price of $2,200. But the special offer that we have for all of you for attending this webinar, I can't thank you enough for doing so. We're going to give you 25% off every single annual subscription, the yearly subscription. So these are just offers for the yearly subscriptions for either the membership, the daily briefing, or the deep dive analysis. But Josh said I need to do one better. And I'm taking Josh's word for it here. So we're actually going to add a special bonus. If you're interested in the deep dive analysis, I will throw in the other 2 subscriptions, the membership and the daily briefing, for no additional cost. So you'll get the 25% off the deep dive analysis plus the other 2 at no additional cost, $1,650 for all of it. So that's the offer that we have for everybody on the webinar. And because I know it's a lot of money, especially a deep dive analysis, unlike the Federal Reserve, I'm going to remove all risk for you. So if you don't think it's worth it, I'm going to give you 30 days money back guarantee. You don't like the subscription, you don't think it's worth it, you send me an email or you send Eurodollar University an email. I get some of them. You send me an email, say, I want my money back. No questions asked. We will refund you right there on the spot. So 30-day guarantee. Big savings on the annual subscriptions. And if you like the deep dive analysis, get the other 2 products for free. You can look at the sales page where you can sign up. And this is a limited time offer. That's at eurodollar.university/webinar-offer. Again, eurodollar.university/webinar-offer. And one final thing, because this topic on the dollar system is something that's incredibly important. It's obviously something lots of people have been talking about, and not just about the BRICS or the gold standard or anything like that. This is a very crucial topic, and whether we realize it or really fully realize it in the United States or not, it's something that we need to talk about. And it's something that I'm going to continue to talk about next week. I have a special guest. I'm going to talk with Brent Johnson. And Brent and I are going to continue this very same conversation. He's going to bring in his own 2 cents. Of course, those 2 cents won't be physical. They'll be ledger Eurodollar entries. But he's going to bring in his own 2 cents. And we're going to have a pretty extensive conversation that we've got mapped out already. We're going to do that next week. And we'll make the video available to all our Eurodollar University members and subscribers. So if you're interested in getting a membership or a subscription or a deep dive analysis so you can have all 3, we're going to talk more about this Eurodollar dominance next week with Brent. And there'll be other special presentations that come up along the way. And with that, let me just say Thank you, everybody, for joining me again. I really appreciate it. It's so incredibly heartening just to go back to the my original story, what we was talking about from the beginning. When I first started this Eurodollar investigation, it was just me. Nobody cared. And as I tried to talk about it, I mean, through the decades, even 2008 crisis, people really didn't care that much about the Eurodollar system. They just wanted it all to stop and everything go back to normal. So it is incredibly personally gratifying to me to be able to do a webinar on this topic and have such a massive audience be deeply involved and really interested in this same stuff. I can tell you that's a huge positive for the world, because the more people get interested in how these things work and what's really happening, the more we'll have the opportunity to do something about it. And again, take it from me, somebody who's been doing this for decades. We started out, nobody cared, and now lots of people actually do care. So I cannot thank you all enough for attending this webinar. I truly appreciate it. And if I can do more for you for the subscriptions, make sure you sign up for those. With that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Josh, and we will get to the questions and answer session part of this. Josh, are you there? There he is, tagging in.
Hello. Yes, Jeff.
Gotcha.
One thing I would like to say, because I am a member of Eurodollar University and I absolutely love it, but why would you want to join? And I think the main reason is if you actually want the education. If you want the top 5 stock picks that you should go and buy today to make you $1 million, no, this is definitely not for you. Because what is it? It is Eurodollar University. You are going to be learning more than you could ever imagine. And at first, I was definitely overwhelmed by going. And I started with the classroom videos, and I was like, holy smokes, I didn't even know this was finance anymore. What the hell are we talking about? So fortunately, you had the basics to kind of break it down, and then I could understand the kind of base layer that I needed to then tackle the classroom and more complicated videos. So let's get into the Q&A, because
just to build upon the point, the whole point of Eurodollar University is to give you the tools and information to make decisions, but what we hope are better informed decisions. I'm not trying to give you the answers. I'll give you my interpretation of stuff, but it's really about how can I help you learn and think through all of these things and kind of guide you through this journey, this Eurodollar process journey. Think about money theory and how it's actually practiced. That's what Eurodollar University is really about. And thanks, Josh, for bringing that up, because that's our mission statement here.
Yeah. So the first question that I saw was, if the Eurodollar system is broken, do you think there's a way to fix it? And then building off that question, so if it's broken and we are growing at a slower economic availability, is it possible to start with the current Eurodollar system to start to re-amp growth and start overtrending growth again? Or are we just screwed because the system's broken?
Yeah, I think that's the natural question to ask. And it's one that, been thinking about for a long time. And I think it's 16 plus years since it broke down, which I think gives us a pretty good answer about whether or not we can actually go back to the pre-crisis way of operating the Eurodollar system. And the answer is, I think, no. I think it's a resounding no. Even after the last couple of years where the government threw everything they could think of at the supply shock period, the pandemic period, and all that, the banking system kind of picked up for a little bit there when the government was all in, and then as soon as all that stuff went away, it went right back into its shell again. And you can see why. I mean, everything that's happened over the last year just reinforces all of the negative notions and impressions that banks have been developing ever since August 9th of 2007. And we have to keep in mind, too, banks don't operate the way they did in August of 2007. They've completely changed the way that they've operate, which there's good and bad points about that. It's good that we don't have any more, ridiculous cowboy shit that they got away with for a long period of time. The bad is maybe we needed all that cowboy shit in order for the system to function in the way that it had beforehand. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but there is definitely a case to be thought of that we literally can't go back to the other operation. And over the last 15 years, where we've been constantly stuck in this low growth mode, I'd like to get out of it. Maybe it's too late for me, but I've got young girls, young daughters, so I'd like to see them grow up into a relatively fruitful world. And I am long-term optimistic that we will do so. And I think the way we do so is by pretty much everything that we've been talking about in this presentation is let's realize the Eurodollar system is broke, and let's maybe not fix it, but let's build up from its capabilities, build up from its template, realize the things that were really good about it, realize the things that were really bad about it, and see if we can't start with a new system or overlay a new system on top of those good points and maybe avoid the bad points. So I do think there is a pathway to do the monetary system right. Though, if for my own personal preference, I don't really like the idea of our money, this ledger system, being maintained by a cartel of large banks. I would prefer something other than that. Maybe even a government money system might be preferable to something like that. And there's a number of, we could do a whole webinar on that, Josh. Why wouldn't we want a cartel of banks running our monetary system?
We just need some more cowboy shit going on, Jeff. The Wild West. So what do you think an ideal monetary system would look like? I know this is such a broad statement, so breaking it down a little bit more is, if this is broken, and as we've seen it seems to be very hard to get back on trend or impossible, what would actually change that? If we need something that can replace the aspects that the Eurodollar system does right, is that crypto? I would find it hard to believe that that's gold, because we're living in a digital age. But what is the role of gold in this system, and what are we doing? How do we get back on trend? Because you do have some of these smartest daughters or humans that I've ever met in my entire life, and I would also love to see a world that I would want to bring kids into as well.
That's the question, right? We got to start with the realization there is no such thing as an ideal currency arrangement. Let's assume we get the currency system resolved and reformed. Our grandchildren are going to be talking about the same thing, because that currency system will break down, and then the one after that will break down, and the one after that will break down. So there is no ideal currency system. But what we're really trying to do is buy ourselves as much time as we possibly can to create enough wealth and growth and capacity over the decades in between that it makes it worthwhile to go through these down cycles, because I think they're inevitable. And so what is it that the Eurodollar did that caused it to dominate? And as I keep saying, it was so friggin' usable. It made this common medium widely available. People don't care about the mechanics. People don't care about the theory. They don't care about gold or Bitcoin or anything else. They just want to know that if I stick my card in the machine, if I tap the little point of sale machine that's at the cash register, I'll be able to walk home with whatever goods that I just purchased or whatever service I was looking for. And so that's the guiding principle here. How do we have a useful medium that's available everywhere? And that's where digital currencies have potential. They're nowhere near ready for prime time, but they're really think about what blockchain technology is. Blockchain is a ledger system, except it's a ledger system that's not maintained by a cartel of large banks. And it's a ledger system, if we get more incarnations and more iterations that are more sophisticated and better performing, they could start to replicate some of the capacities of this massive Eurodollar network. Because from the perspective of blockchain and digital currencies, we look at this ad hoc Eurodollar system and how all these various pieces are just kind of thrown together. It had gone from elegant in 1970 to nowadays it's kind of inelegant and even doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So there are, I think, pathways to get forward. But again, the ideal currency, that's not the point. The job of any reserve currency or any currency system is to make sure that you have enough currency to meet legitimate demand. And that's a loaded term, because there are all sorts of historical arguments about what is legitimate demand. Is speculation legitimate demand? Is buying financial assets legitimate demand? But essentially enough currency, make it available so that legitimate demand can be met without causing all of these problems and bottlenecks that create impediments to what is supposed to be a commercial tool. That's all money is. It's not wealth. Money is a commercial tool so that you and I can transact in a common medium. I can pay you tomorrow, and then you could take that token and go pay somebody else and buy something else. We can all transact without having to go back to a barter system that is incredibly inefficient. A global currency system, or any currency system that is that can most efficiently match supply with demand, that's the one that sticks around. And that's what the Eurodollar did really well up until it started to do it too well.
Yeah, so if kind of going to Neil Howe in the fourth turning, if we are just going through the fourth turning right now, and maybe 10 years down the line, we start to go through the first turning again, and we do have economic growth, do you think it's possible that that's under the Eurodollar system? Have you put any thought into that? Or do you think the reason why we have so much economic problem today could be because of the cycles that we see throughout history?
Yeah, I think it's the Eurodollar system is the big impediment to reaching that next phase. The next phase should be a relatively good one. Once the currency, the Eurodollar is just too much of an impediment to overcome. And I think about it in terms of these cycles, maybe not necessarily with Neil Howe, but long-term cycles. We go through these periods all the time. Think about the Great Depression. The Great Depression, when did that get? Well, World War II didn't solve the Great Depression. Bretton Woods kind of did, because we got together we had enough urgency from everything, the world falling apart at that point, and said, let's prepare for the world on the other side of this, and let's get our currency system fixed in the way that we think it could be, so that we can take advantage of what had been a 2-decade period, or almost 2-decade period, 15-year period. Sounds familiar, right? A 15-year period where we had to suffer from economic and eventually political consequences of lack of economic growth. So the issue here is, it's the next cycle doesn't start until we actually fix this problem. And part of the cyclical change is that something creates enough urgency that we realize that this needs to be fixed, and we do something about it. Whether that really should have been 2009. We should have been talking about everything here in 2009, but everybody went back to sleep because Ben Bernanke did QE. That was the whole point of QE, was to get people to stop thinking about all of these things. And most people did want to stop thinking about them because they just wanted it all to stop and they wanted to go back to normal. But there has to be something that creates enough urgency, whether it's a top-down, some major issue, whether it's from the bottom up, a grassroots approach, whether it's, cryptocurrencies becoming a mature technology and just sort of, like the Eurodollar did, taking over under the cover of darkness when nobody knows it. By the time anybody realized it, like, what Klaus Friedrich was talking about in 1970, by the time anybody realized it, it had already taken over everything. Maybe that's the real pathway forward, that the Eurodollar system just kind of keeps the lights on, minimal growth, everything continues to still work if at really low capacity. And then the solution presents itself all the time underneath it. And before anybody knows it, this is a long-term process, but 10 years from now, all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, where'd the Eurodollar go? Well, it was subsumed by this other currency system, and we didn't really notice it because it was a slow incremental progress. And I think that's kind of the direction that we would like to move toward, rather than, there are some benefits. If we do have something like a crash, maybe that creates a possible solution. We can move up the date to move into something else. But I think all things being equal, it would be nice if we had a nice, another slow transition, because I don't think there's anything close to ready to taking over from the Eurodollar capacities right now. So we're already looking way down in the future anyway.
So what do you do once you actually understand this information? Because I get it that the world it looks like we're definitely going in the wrong direction, but how can we actually prepare for something like that?
Well, I think the good news is that there are a lot of people who are working on it. And that's what digital currencies are. That's the promise. The bad news is they're nowhere close to being able to do it. And I think sort of like gold, Bitcoin, I don't want to pick on Bitcoin, but a lot of digital currency people need to understand, they need to make, and a lot of them do, by the way, because I work with some, they do understand that they need to make a useful medium. There is this arrogance about some of the digital currencies that they just need to wait for the dollar to destroy itself, and then Bitcoin will take over, or gold will reemerge in a new gold standard. But they haven't done anything to make these currencies useful as the Eurodollar. Again, the challenge here is to replace the capacities and capabilities of the Eurodollar system. And the Eurodollar, because nothing is going to change it and nothing is challenging it currently, it's not going to just destroy itself. It's not going to implode and disappear. The dollar is not going to zero. If you're sitting here waiting for dollar doom, you're going to be waiting a long time, and you're squandering all this time and opportunity to make a useful currency that can at least start to move down that road. But moving down that road it's going to take a lot of patience and a lot of effort. And fortunately, there are a lot of smart people, and there are a lot of smart people with a lot of resources behind them that are actually looking to do this, to make usable mediums. They're just not anywhere close to doing it on a large enough scale. But you give it enough time, if we can buy enough time to keep the lights on that long, eventually there is definitely some promise to get there.
All right. What do you think of the recent sell-off in long-term U.S. Treasuries is due to a lack of dollar availability in the global economy and dealers becoming forced sellers to cover liquidity needs? If it's not that, then what are your thoughts on the U.S. Treasury's recent sell-off?
Yeah, I think that's part of it because, again, as I've talked about on YouTube quite a bit, we look at the curve. The curve is almost bifurcated now. The long end is doing something very different than the short end is doing. Yesterday and today, perfect example. The 2-year Treasury was actually bid. Rates went down in the front end of the curve. Even Treasury bill yields kind of ticked down a little bit. So the front end is kind of doing this, and the back end's going like this. And I think that's a lot of it. If you're a manager, a reserve manager, and you need to raise dollar liquidity, you want to sell the stuff that isn't working. And right now, long-term yields are the thing that's not working. And there's also a dichotomy, too, between onshore and offshore, where the selling seems to come from domestic holders and domestic investors. So I wonder if there's not something to do with bond funds there, too. But really, to me, and I know this is an unsatisfying answer, it comes down to we go through this every September. It's an August, September, and October effect, and it has a massive effect on the global bond market, especially at the long end of these yield curves, or at the long end of every yield curve. And so whatever it is that's causing that seasonal impact, it creates this self-feeding mechanism where in this type of environment, we're selling long-term treasuries and putting all of our fundamental outlook in the short part of the curve. And if that's the case, if I'm right about that, then we should see long-term rates, the sell-off start to peter out here as we end October and into November. That was certainly the case last year. That was the case in 2018, 2019, and 2019 too, I believe. So September effect, you sell the stuff that's not working. I don't think this is, in fact, I'm pretty sure it's not about rate hikes. It's not about higher for longer because those things would have been impacting the short end of the yield curve as much as the long end, and they're not. So again, I think there's financial technical considerations, but more than that, it's the September effect. That's what it looks like to me.
All right. Franco says, I am new with all of this. Where can I start to just begin my journey on understanding the Eurodollar market?
Well, if you want to sign up for a membership, as Josh said, you start out with the basics and go from there. There's a lot of good material about the background information that you need. I mean, we have to start with the question, what is money? Which is basics number one. What is money? Because again, most people have this concept, and it's understandable why they do. They think it's these government pieces of paper, which, the government would like you to think that because then it sounds like the government is in control of the currency, and the government would like you to believe that it's in control of its currency. But, we have to go back and think about monetary systems and even money itself from the ground up. And so where do you start from all this? I don't recommend doing what I did, which was through many years of study, going back through primary source material. And the reason I had to go back through primary source material is because monetary scholarship since Volcker has been utter and complete crap. There is almost nothing useful over the last, 40 years or so. And so I had to go back back at a time when everything wasn't on the internet, but I had to go back into primary source material and start learning some of the stuff that I was seeing and putting together in real time from the original authors themselves. But there are certain sources. Some people out there are pretty good. Some people recommend Perry Marilling, who talks about the moneyness of the money. I forget what it's called, but essentially, I mean, he's a good one to start to start at least thinking about this. There are others, some of the older stuff. Milton Friedman's article on Eurodollar first principles. I think that does a really good job of a very basic term describing the Eurodollar system from its most primitive concepts, and then you could go from there. But it's incredibly difficult there isn't a textbook out there that you just leaf through from one chapter to the next.
There's one, Jeff. There's Eurodollar University, but that honestly is the only place that I've heard of the Eurodollar. You really, You didn't coin the term, but I think you really are what popularized it, which is pretty cool to think about, that you kind of started a little Eurodollar revolution, to say. And I know that you do have all of the sources that you look at for all the information on your website as well that I didn't even know about until I was just shuffling around your website one day. And I said, geez, this is every single thing that Jeff looks at, from all the papers to all the charts, the repo collateral stuff that you're talking about. I'm like, holy smokes, how the hell do you have time to do every single thing that you're doing? Because you're doing the 1,500 words a day. You're making a video every single day. You have videos going up weekly. I just don't even know how you're doing this. It's like there's 4 or 5 of you.
Well, but Josh, that's the whole point, is that we're filling in a gap that's really that's there. It's been that way for a long period of time, and we're trying to give people the tools, the ability to think through all of that. That's really what the classroom video is about. And again, not to plug ourselves too much here, but that's what Eurodollar University is about, is trying to guide you through this Eurodollar process from the scratch, so that you can understand these concepts and then adopt them to whatever purpose that you want to go through. And I wish there was somebody else who did it, because I'm not sure, I'm not sure I'm the best one to go through this. And I'm not sure that, I don't have a whole lot of time other than to do these kinds of things, but it's that important to do it. It's that important to understand the monetary system and then adopt it to your own purposes and take it from there. And that's really what we're trying to do, is give you the knowledge and the tools, the background, the material to think through all of these concepts and come to your own conclusions. Again, like I said, I'll give you my interpretation, but I make no bones. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball either. But if I could help you understand some of the background concepts, I think we're both better off for it. Because again, from my perspective, the more people that are talking about it and more people are thinking about it, the better off we're going to be in the long run.
Yeah, so we will leave it there. But before you go, I just want you to go over the sales pitch one more time, because I honestly just think it's a great product if you want education, if that is something that you're interested in learning, what money is and why it matters, and going through the deep intertwines of the Eurodollar system that you can talk about with nobody, because no one else cares about. But it is fun, and I think it's one of the most useful things I've ever done. And I just wanted to specify, you said it was a yearly subscription model where all of the discounts were. So can you just run us through that one more time, Jeff? Because you said we can't go through wrong, because we can't go too long, because you have to get back to work. It's Friday night.
It'll be a long day.
And you're saying you're going to have to work till midnight tonight because we did this. So if you guys do appreciate all the work Jeff does, just hopefully we'll do another one of these in maybe 6 to 8 weeks. And if people enjoy them. So let us know what you think. And Jeff, kick it off with one last sales pitch.
Yeah, it's the annual subscriptions to either the memberships, the daily briefing, or the daily deep dive analysis. It's 25% off the yearly numbers. Again, the memberships, that gives you all the basics, the presentations, the question and answers, the weekly recaps, plus the resource library that we're really building out to have all of this material available for Eurodollar University members. The daily briefing is current events, the biggest macroeconomic developments. I give you what happened, as well as a couple paragraphs, usually 3 or 4 paragraphs on my interpretation, plus what's going on in the marketplace. There's usually at the final section about, hey, what's going on, collateral curves, that type of thing. That's the daily briefing. And then the deep dive analysis, where we really go deep from the Eurodollar perspective on all of these things, matching up current events with some of this historical background to try to make sense of what's happening here. That's the daily deep dive analysis. And if you want the daily deep dive analysis, because it's a considerable investment, I'm willing to give you the daily briefing and the membership for no additional cost. But if you want, just a membership or a daily briefing, it's 25% off any of the yearly subscriptions.
Also, I can't stress this enough. They will be going much further. Jeff and Brent, who Brent can actually ask intelligent follow-up questions, and they can go back and forth and have one of the best discussions of the year, and that will be on Eurodollar University sometime next week, right, Jeff?
Yeah, we haven't really nailed down the schedule. It's either early part of the week, so that we look for that video, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. I always like chatting with Brent anyway, and we're going to have a pretty detailed discussion about this, because it's a topic we're both pretty passionate about. As you know, if anybody knows Brent, this is his thing too. And yes, we'll have that done early next week, and that'll be up on the Eurodollar membership site, as well as available for subscription subscribers later in the week.
All right, Jeff, thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you too, Josh. Really appreciate it.
All right, let's end this.